Her daughter went missing on a road trip. But 8 years later, the mother spots a biker at a pub and notices something shocking. Diana Matthews sat across from Detective Wilson at the small Arizona police station, her fingers trembling slightly as she slid a worn manila folder across his desk. The folder contained her daughter Emma's missing person report and a collection of photos that Diana had carried with her for 8 years, and the edges softened from countless handlings. "Thank you for seeing me," Detective Diana said, her voice steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. "My daughter Emma disappeared 8 years ago from a gas station bathroom in Nevada. We were on a road trip to visit my sister in California." Detective Wilson nodded politely as he opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page of the report, taking in the details of a case that had gone cold years ago. Diana watched his face carefully, having learned to read the subtle shifts in expression that told her whether someone was truly listening or merely humoring her. She was 17. Diana continued, reaching across to tap one of the photos. It showed Emma with her long, blonde, wavy hair framing her face, her striking blue eyes, just like Diana's, bright with youth and possibility. "We stopped for gas just outside of Las Vegas. Emma went to use the restroom while I filled the tank. When she didn't come back after 15 minutes, I went looking for her." Diana paused, the memory still razor sharp. Despite the passage of time, she was just gone. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, just gone. Wilson flipped through the file, examining the police reports and follow-up investigations. "And you believe there's been a sighting near Copper Canyon?" he asked, referring to the small Arizona town they were in. "Yes." Diana leaned forward, her eyes intense. "A woman matching Emma's age, progressed description, was reported at a truck stop about 30 kilometers from here 3 weeks ago. The witness said she seemed disoriented and was quickly ushered into a vehicle by a man before they could approach her." The detective nodded, but Diana could see his interest waning as he realized the case originated in Nevada. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he leaned back in his chair. Subtle cues that told Diana he was already mentally classifying her as another desperate parent clinging to impossible hope. "Detective Wilson," Diana said, her voice dropping to a more urgent tone. "This isn't just about Emma anymore." She reached into her bag and pulled out another, thicker folder. "Over the past 8 years, I've been tracking similar disappearances across the Southwest. Young women, mostly teenagers, vanishing from isolated gas stations and rest stops along interstate highways." She opened the folder to reveal meticulously organized newspaper clippings, printouts of online articles, and a hand-drawn map with red pins marking disappearance locations. "There's a pattern here. 17 cases that I found with nearly identical circumstances to Emma's. 4 of them have connections to this region." Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly as he examined Diana's research. She could see a flicker of professional curiosity, but it quickly faded as he closed both folders and slid them back across the desk. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his tone gentle but dismissive, "I understand your dedication and I commend your thoroughness, but after 8 years, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The likelihood of finding new evidence is extremely low, and these connections you found, they could be coincidental. These types of locations are unfortunately common for all sorts of crimes." Diana had heard variations of this speech dozens of times from law enforcement officers across 5 states. She kept her expression neutral, though disappointment settled in her stomach like a stone. "I understand," she said quietly, "but if there's even a chance that Emma is out there, or that other girls could be saved." Wilson nodded and reached for a business card from the holder on his desk. He scribbled a number on the back before handing it to Diana. "This is my direct line. If you do find anything concrete while you're in town, please call me. I'll keep an eye out, I promise." Diana accepted the card. Recognizing the gesture for what it was, a polite dismissal, she tucked it into her purse alongside dozens of similar cards collected over the years. "Thank you for your time," she said, gathering her materials and carefully returning Emma's photo to the folder. The image of her daughter's bright blue eyes and hopeful smile was as familiar to Diana as her own reflection, a constant reminder of what she had lost and what she still fought to find. Detective Wilson walked her to the station door, offering platitudes about keeping the case in mind. Diana thanked him with practiced politeness, recognizing that he had already mentally moved on to other more pressing cases. As they shook hands, she saw the familiar look of pity in his eyes, the one that said he believed she was chasing ghosts. Perhaps she was. But until she knew for certain what had happened to Emma, Diana would continue her search one small town at a time. Diana exited the police station into the afternoon heat, the bright Arizona sun momentarily blinding her. The temperature had climbed well past 90 degrees, and the metal door handle of her rental car burned against her palm as she yanked it open. She slid into the driver's seat, the vinyl hot against the backs of her legs, despite her long pants. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the police station through the windshield. Another dead end. Another sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful conversation. The frustration that she usually kept carefully contained bubbled to the surface, and Diana slammed her hand against the steering wheel. The sharp pain, a momentary distraction from the deeper ache in her chest. "Damn it," she whispered, her voice cracking. 8 years of searching, of following the faintest leads, of building her own investigation when official channels failed her. 8 years of hope repeatedly kindled and extinguished. Diana took a deep breath, then another, forcing herself to regain composure. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not when Emma might still be out there, waiting to be found. She started the car, the air conditioning sputtering to life with a mechanical wheeze, and pulled away from the police station. Copper Canyon was like dozens of other small towns Diana had visited during her search. Bleached buildings lining the main street. Faded storefronts advertising businesses that had seen better days. Pickup trucks and dusty sedans parked at angles along the curb. She drove slowly, taking in the details of this unfamiliar place that might hold the key to finding her daughter. Her GPS directed her through the town center and toward the outskirts where the Desert Moon Motel waited, with its promise of budget accommodations. Diana had become an expert at stretching her limited resources. The insurance money from her husband's death 6 years ago had helped fund her search, but it wouldn't last forever. She'd sold their house in Seattle 2 years after Emma's disappearance, unable to bear the emptiness of the rooms that had once echoed with her daughter's laughter. The Desert Moon Motel's neon sign flickered inconsistently against the afternoon sky. Some letters illuminated, while others remained dark. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 3 other vehicles scattered across the cracked asphalt. Diana pulled into a space near the office and gathered her folders before stepping back into the heat. The motel clear barely looked up from his phone as Diana checked in, sliding a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped fob across the counter. Room 114 was at the far end of the single-story building, away from the office and the road. Diana unlocked the door to find exactly what she expected. A queen-sized bed with a faded floral comforter, a small table with 2 chairs, a dresser with a TV that probably still had actual dials, and a bathroom that would be clean but worn around the edges. She set her folders on the table and her small suitcase on the luggage rack before heading to the bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead as Diana splashed water on her face, trying to wash away the disappointment of the day. She studied her reflection in the mirror. The fine lines around her eyes had deepened over the years, and strands of gray now threaded through her brown hair. At 46, she looked older than her years. The toll of her ongoing search etched into her features. Diana's stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the granola bar she'd had with coffee early that morning. She dried her face with a thin motel towel and returned to the main room, checking the time on her phone. nearly 5:30 p.m. She needed to eat before reviewing her notes and planning tomorrow's activities. She sat on the edge of the bed and searched for nearby restaurants on her phone. Most of the options were fast food chains on the highway, but a local establishment called the Roadrunner caught her attention. The reviews described it as a local pub with decent food, and it was just a 10-minute drive from the motel. Diana gathered her purse, making sure to place Emma's photo inside, as she always did. It was a ritual she'd maintained throughout her search, keeping Emma close, showing her picture to waitresses, store clerks, and anyone else who might have seen her. The photo was newer than the one in the police file and age progression image created by a forensic artist 3 years ago that showed what Emma might look like in her early 20s. As Diana locked her motel room door, she pushed aside the day's disappointment and focused on what came next. Tomorrow, she would visit the truck stop where the potential sighting had occurred. She would talk to employees, show Emma's picture, and perhaps find someone who remembered something useful. She couldn't allow today's setback to derail her mission. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon as Diana drove toward the Roadrunner, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. She'd learned to take each day, as it came each small step, as part of the longer journey. Somewhere out there, Emma was waiting to be found. Diana was certain of it. She had to be, because the alternative was unthinkable. Diana parked outside the Roadrunner, her rental car looking out of place among the dusty pickup trucks and row of motorcycles lined up in front of the weathered building. The bikes gleamed in the evening light, their chrome and custom paint jobs a stark contrast to the pub's faded exterior. Diana hesitated, her hand on the door handle, as she assessed the establishment. She'd been in rougher places during her search. Biker bars in Nevada, truck stops in Texas, roadhouses in New Mexico, all potential sources of information about Emma. After a moment's consideration, Diana stepped out of her car and walked toward the entrance. The sound of classic rock music and the murmur of conversation spilled out each time the door opened. She straightened her shoulders and pushed inside immediately, enveloped by the smell of beer-fried food and cigarette smoke that clung to the wood paneling despite smoking bans. The Roadrunner was moderately busy for a weekend night with patrons scattered at tables and along the bar. A pool table occupied one corner, currently unattended, while a jukebox near the restrooms provided the soundtrack. Diana scanned the room, noting the mix of locals, some in work clothes, others in casual attire, before making her way to an empty spot at the end of the bar. "What can I get you?" asked the bartender. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and forearms covered in faded tattoos. "Just a burger and a soda, please," Diana replied, settling onto the bar stool. The bartender nodded. "Coming right up. I'm Mike, by the way. Haven't seen you around before." "Diana, just passing through town," she said, offering the simplified explanation she'd perfected over the years. Sometimes she shared more. But tonight she was too tired for the sympathetic looks and well-meaning but unhelpful suggestions that usually followed her story. Mike placed a glass of soda in front of her and called her order back to the kitchen. Diana sipped her drink, observing the other patrons, while trying not to be obvious about it. The relative calm of the pub was disrupted when the doors swung open with more force than necessary, and a group of 5 men entered. Their arrival shifted the energy in the room immediately. Conversations quieted, and several patrons glanced up before quickly returning their attention to their drinks. The newcomers wore leather vests over T-shirts, their arms adorned with tattoos and their faces weathered by sun and hard living. The patches on their vests identified them as members of the Iron Wolves MC. Diana had encountered various motorcycle clubs during her search and knew enough to recognize that these weren't weekend riders, but members of an organized gang. The bikers claimed a table in the center of the room, their presence commanding attention without them having to demand it. Mike quickly delivered beers without being asked, suggesting they were regulars whose preferences he knew well. Diana kept to herself, picking at the burger that arrived a few minutes later. She was about to ask Mike for the check when movement from the biker's table caught her attention. One of the men with long hair and a full beard reached for his drink. As he extended his arm, Diana's gaze was drawn to a tattoo on his forearm. A woman's face rendered in remarkable detail with striking blue eyes that seemed to stare directly at Diana from across the room. Her heart stopped. Those eyes, though, the face was that of a woman in her mid-ends, not her 17-year-old daughter. Something about those eyes made Diana's pulse quicken. They were hauntingly familiar, for the same unusual shade of blue as Emma's as her own. Diana forced herself to look away, not wanting to draw attention. She took a sip of her soda, her hand trembling slightly as she set the glass back down. It could be coincidence, she told herself. Blue eyes weren't uncommon, but the specific shade, the shape, it was like looking at an older version of her daughter's eyes staring out from this stranger's skin. When Mike passed by to refill her soda, Diana casually gestured toward the biker's table. "Locals?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Mike glanced over his shoulder and lowered his voice. "Iron wolves. They have territory across several states, but they've been more visible around here lately. Best to keep your distance." Diana nodded as if merely curious. "The one with the long hair. That tattoo on his arm is impressive work." "That's Viper," Mike said, wiping down the bar. "One of their lieutenants. And yeah, he's proud of that ink." "It's supposed to be Crystal." "Crystal," Diana prompted, trying to sound only casually interested. "His girlfriend, or that's what they call her anyway." Mike's expression darkened slightly. "She works at the dollhouse outside town." "The dollhouse?" Mike gave her a knowing look. "Calls itself a gentleman's club, but everyone knows what it really is. Brothel disguised as a strip joint. The cops leave it alone mostly. It's just outside the town limits, and I guess they figure it keeps certain activities contained." Diana's mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. A brothel, a young woman with Emma's eyes. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore, but she needed to be careful. She'd learned through painful experience that rushing in without information could close doors permanently. "Sounds like an interesting place," Diana said non-committally, finishing her soda. Mike shrugged. "Not for decent folks you passing through or staying in town a while." "Just a couple of days," Diana replied, placing money on the bar to cover her meal and a tip. "Thanks for the food and conversation." As she gathered her purse, Diana couldn't resist one more glance at the biker called Viper. He was laughing at something one of his companions had said, the tattoo on his arm shifting as he moved. Those eyes, Emma's eyes, seemed to follow Diana, calling to her from across the room. Diana had followed countless leads over 8 years, many of them leading nowhere. But something about this one felt different. Whether it was mother's intuition or simply desperation, Diana couldn't say, but she knew with certainty that she needed to find out who Crystal was and why she had her daughter's eyes. Diana finished her meal quickly, keeping a discreet eye on Viper and his crew as she ate. She'd learned to observe without being obvious, a skill honed through years of investigating her daughter's disappearance. When the bikers began gathering their belongings and draining the last of their beers, Diana hurriedly paid her bill and thanked Mike before slipping out the door ahead of them. The evening air had cooled slightly, though warmth still radiated from the asphalt parking lot. Diana got into her rental car, but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, she waited, watching through the windshield as the bikers emerged from the Roadrunner moments later. They were loud and boisterous, shoving each other good-naturedly as they approached their motorcycles. Diana slouched down in her seat, slightly not wanting to be noticed as the men mounted their bikes. The engines roared to life in quick succession, the sound echoing across the parking lot. Viper, distinguishable by his long hair and imposing build, led the group as they pulled onto the main road and accelerated away. Diana waited until they were a good distance ahead before starting her car and pulling out to follow them. She kept several vehicles between them, maintaining enough distance to avoid suspicion while not losing sight of the distinctive leather vests and motorcycles. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline sharpening her focus as she navigated the unfamiliar streets. The bikers led her through town and toward the outskirts, eventually turning onto a road that wound through the desert landscape. Fewer cars traveled this route, making it harder for Diana to remain inconspicuous. She dropped back further, relying on the motorcycle's tail lights to guide her through the gathering darkness. After about 15 minutes, a building appeared in the distance, its neon signs creating a garish glow against the desert night. As Diana drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a large single-story structure with a parking lot already half filled with vehicles. A sign shaped like a woman's silhouette proclaimed the dollhouse in pink neon, with smaller text beneath reading Gentlemen's Club. The bikers turned into the parking lot, circling around to a side entrance rather than the main doors where a small line of men waited to enter. Diana drove past, slowly noting the layout of the building and its surroundings, before finding a spot in the far corner of the lot where she could observe without drawing attention. From her vantage point, Diana watched as Viper and his associates disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only." Regular customers continued to arrive, entering through the main entrance, where a bouncer checked IDs and collected cover charges. The contrast between the two entrances was telling. The bikers clearly had a different relationship with the establishment than ordinary patrons. Diana sat in her car, the engine off, but the windows cracked to allow for air circulation in the still, warm evening. She observed the comings and goings, noting patterns in the flow of people. Occasionally, women would emerge from the main building and walk to a smaller structure about 50 yards behind it. A long, low building that resembled a motel with doors facing away from the main establishment. Sometimes they were accompanied by men. Other times they moved between buildings alone or in pairs. After about an hour of observation, Diana noticed movement at the side entrance. A group of men exited Viper among them. Instead of returning to their motorcycles, they headed toward a dirt road that led away from the dollhouse toward what appeared to be a compound in the distance. Even in the darkness, Diana could make out the outline of a fence surrounding several buildings about a 4-mile away. Making a quick decision, Diana started her car and circled around the parking lot, finding an exit that connected to the main road. She drove about half a mile before turning onto a smaller access road that seemed to run parallel to the direction the bikers had taken. The rental car bounced over the uneven terrain, its headlights illuminating scrub brush and cacti. As Diana searched for a vantage point, she found what she was looking for on a small ridge overlooking the compound. Diana parked behind a large rock formation that would hide her vehicle from casual observation and killed the lights. From here, she had a clear view of the fenced area below, where security lights illuminated a central courtyard surrounded by several buildings of varying sizes. Diana reached for her purse and retrieved a pair of compact binoculars she'd carried throughout her search. Through them, she could see the bikers entering what appeared to be the main building. Other figures moved around the compound, men patrolling the perimeter and women being escorted between buildings. As the night deepened, Diana remained vigilant, watching the compound through her binoculars and occasionally using her phone's camera to zoom in and take photos, though the quality was poor in the low light. She was about to give up for the night when movement near one of the smaller buildings caught her attention. A woman emerged, escorted by a man Diana didn't recognize. Even from this distance, something about the woman's movements made Diana's breath catch in her throat. The way she walked, a slight hesitation before each step, as if she were perpetually uncertain, was achingly familiar. It was Emma's walk, a distinctive gait that Diana would recognize anywhere, a physical mannerism that had persisted from childhood, when Emma had been diagnosed with a minor issue affecting her balance. Diana's hands trembled as she raised her phone trying to capture a clear image despite the distance and poor lighting. The woman was led across the courtyard and into another building visible for less than a minute. But it was enough. Despite being older and thinner than the teenager who had disappeared 8 years ago, Diana was certain the woman was Emma. Diana's hands shook violently as she tried to take clear photos with her phone. The distance and poor lighting made it difficult. But she managed to capture several images as the woman Emma, it had to be Emma, was escorted across the compound. The quality wasn't perfect, but there was enough detail to confirm what Diana's heart already knew. When the woman disappeared into one of the buildings, Diana lowered her phone, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The emotional impact hit her all at once. Hope, fear, joy, and rage colliding in a tsunami that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. She pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a sob, tears blurring her vision as 8 years of searching crystallized into this single, surreal moment. "Emma," she whispered into the darkness. "Oh my God, Emma." Diana forced herself to take deep breaths, fighting to regain control. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. Not when she was so close, not when Emma needed her more than ever. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and started the car, carefully navigating back to the main road without turning on her headlights until she was a safe distance from the compound. Once on the highway, Diana pulled over at the first opportunity, a deserted scenic overlook that provided privacy. She needed to examine the photos she'd taken and confirm what she believed she'd seen. With trembling fingers, she pulled Emma's age progression photos from her purse images she'd commissioned from a forensic artist that showed what Emma might look like now at 25. Diana swiped through the photos she'd just taken, comparing them to the age progression images. Despite the poor quality and distance, the similarities were unmistakable. The same facial structure, the same posture, the same distinctive walk that only a mother would recognize. The woman in the compound was thinner than in the projections, her body language suggesting a weariness that hadn't been present in the 17-year-old Emma, but it was her. After 8 years of searching, Diana had found her daughter. The realization brought a fresh wave of emotion, but also a surge of determination. Emma was alive, but she was being held in what appeared to be a brothel run by a motorcycle gang. The tattoo on Viper's arm, those familiar blue eyes, suddenly made horrifying sense. Diana's stomach turned at the implications, at what her daughter must have endured over the past 8 years. Diana's first instinct was to drive straight to the compound, to demand her daughter's release, to bring the full force of her maternal fury down upon those who had taken Emma. But she knew that would likely get them both killed. She needed help, official help. With shaking hands, Diana dialed Detective Wilson's number. It was after 10 p.m., but this couldn't wait until morning. The phone rang several times before a groggy voice answered. "Detective Wilson, this is Diana Matthews," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "I found her. I found Emma." There was a pause, followed by the sounds of movement. "Mrs. Matthews, where are you? I'm on Highway 16, just outside of Copper Canyon." Diana took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "I followed some members of the Iron Wolves motorcycle gang from the Roadrunner pub to a place called the Dollhouse, the strip club." Wilson's voice sharpened, sleep falling away. "It's not just a strip club. There's a compound behind it, fenced, guarded. I saw women being moved between buildings. And I saw Emma. Detective, I saw my daughter." Wilson's sigh was audible. "Mrs. Matthews, I understand you believe." "No," Diana interrupted, her voice firm despite her emotional state. "I'm sending you photos. I have pictures of the compound, and I have pictures of Emma. I know it's her. I'd recognize her anywhere." Diana pulled the phone away from her ear long enough to send the images to Wilson, along with the age progression photos for comparison. "I'm also sending you a photo of a biker called Viper," she continued. He has a tattoo on his arm, a woman's face with blue eyes. They're Emma's eyes, Detective. I'd stake my life on it. There was silence on the line as Wilson presumably examined the photos. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. The Iron Wolves have been on our radar for a while, he said slowly. We've had suspicions about prostitution rings, human trafficking, but we haven't been able to gather enough evidence for a warrant. Well, now you have evidence, Diana insisted. My daughter is in that compound. God knows how many other women are being held there against their will. These photos aren't enough for a warrant, Mrs. Matthews Wilson said, though his voice was gentler now. They're too grainy, taken from too far away, and even if they were clear, they only show women moving between buildings, not any illegal activity. Diana's hope began to crumble. But however, Wilson continued, this does give us something to work with. I can bring this to my Captain C about setting up surveillance, building a case. How long will that take? Diana demanded, panic rising in her throat. Days, weeks. My daughter is in there now. I understand your frustration. Wilson said, his tone professional but sympathetic. But we have to do this by the book, or any case we build could fall apart in court. These are dangerous people, Mrs. Matthews. The Iron Wolves have connections throughout the Southwest, and they don't hesitate to use violence. Diana closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. So, what am I supposed to do? Just wait while my daughter remains in that place. I need you to return to your motel, Wilson said firmly. Stay there and wait for my call. I'm going to make some calls. See what we can put together. I promise you we'll look into this immediately. And if you can't get a warrant, if your captain doesn't believe you, Wilson hesitated. Let me handle that. The important thing is for you to stay safe. Don't go back to the dollhouse or that compound. These people are dangerous, and if they realize you're investigating them, they won't hesitate to hurt you or worse. Diana ended the call with a promise to return to the Desert Moon Motel. But as she started the car, she knew she couldn't simply wait and hope that Detective Wilson would be able to navigate the bureaucracy quickly enough. Not when Emma was so close, not after 8 years of searching. She'd give Wilson a chance to set things in motion, but Diana had no intention of sitting idly by while her daughter remained in danger. She'd come too far, sacrificed too much to stop now. One way or another, she was going to get Emma out of that compound. As night fully descended over the desert, Diana drove toward the dollhouse, her mind racing with possible approaches. She'd returned briefly to her motel to change into more appropriate attire. Dark jeans, a black blouse, and flat shoes that would allow her to move quickly if necessary. She'd also taken time to study the photos she'd captured of the compound, looking for vulnerabilities in the security setup. Diana parked her rental car in the same lot she'd used earlier, positioning it for a quick exit if needed. From her vantage point, she could see that the dollhouse was now in full swing, with a steady stream of men entering and exiting the main building. The neon signs cast an eerie pink glow over the parking lot, illuminating the faces of patrons as they approached the entrance. For nearly an hour, Diana observed the patterns of movement around the establishment. Security at the main entrance consisted of a single bouncer checking IDs and collecting cover charges. The side entrance that the bikers had used earlier was occasionally accessed by staff, but appeared to have no permanent guard. The smaller building behind the main structure saw regular traffic, with women escorting men inside and emerging alone sometime later. Diana's original plan had been to find a way to access the compound directly, but the distance and security made that impractical without equipment she didn't have. Instead, she began to formulate a new approach. If Emma was being moved between the dollhouse and the compound, then getting inside the club might provide an opportunity to locate her, or at least gather more information. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Diana exited her car and walked purposefully toward the main entrance. She'd faced dangerous situations before. During her search had been threatened, followed, and once nearly assaulted. But this was different. This time she knew Emma was close, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The bouncer gave Diana a curious look as she approached. Women entering alone were apparently uncommon, but he took her cover charge without comment and waved her inside. The interior of the dollhouse assaulted Diana's senses immediately. Pounding music made conversation difficult, while the dim lighting punctuated by flashing colored lights created a disorienting atmosphere. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol, perfume, and sweat. Diana paused just inside the entrance, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness while she surveyed the layout. The main room was arranged around a central stage where a dancer performed for a sparse audience. Smaller stages were positioned around the perimeter, some occupied by dancers, others empty. A bar ran along one wall, while booths and tables filled the remaining space. Men sat alone or in groups, some with scantily clad women perched on their laps or seated beside them. Diana moved toward the bar, trying to appear casual despite her racing heart. She ordered a club soda, needing to maintain a clear head, and found a spot where she could observe the room without drawing attention to herself. She was looking for any sign of Emma, any indication of where within this building her daughter might be. As Diana sipped her drink, she noticed a pattern in the movement of the women working the floor. Occasionally, one would lead a customer through a doorway near the back of the room, returning alone sometime later. Others would disappear through a different door marked "Staff Only" and not return to the main floor. Diana suspected that the first door led to private rooms for dances or other services, while the second might connect to the smaller buildings she'd observed from outside, or perhaps even to the compound itself. Diana was considering how to get a closer look at these doors when a large hand landed heavily on her shoulder. She turned to find a bouncer different from the one at the front door, looking down at her with suspicion. "You lost lady?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the music. Diana's mind raced for a plausible explanation for her presence. Before she could respond, a familiar figure appeared beside the bouncer. Viper, the biker, with Emma's eyes tattooed on his arm. He studied Diana with narrowed eyes, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she realized he might have recognized her from the Roadrunner earlier that evening. "Problem here," Dex Viper asked the bouncer, his gaze never leaving Diana's face. "Found her watching the floor." "Came in alone," the bouncer replied. "Doesn't look like our usual clientele." Diana forced herself to remain calm to meet Viper's gaze without flinching despite the hatred burning in her chest for this man who had her daughter's eyes inked into his skin. "I'm not lost," Diana said, thinking quickly. "I'm actually here on business." Viper raised an eyebrow. "Business? What kind of business would a woman like you have in a place like this?" Diana leaned in, slightly lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence. "I represent certain clients with specific interests. I was told the dollhouse might offer the kind of entertainment they're looking for." Client's Viper's expression remained skeptical, but Diana could see she'd pique his interest. "High-end clients who prefer discretion and are willing to pay well for it." Diana continued the lie, flowing smoothly from her lips. "I scout locations before making recommendations. My clients trust my judgment implicitly." Viper exchanged a look with the bouncer before returning his attention to Diana. "And what exactly are these clients of yours looking for?" Diana maintained eye contact, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Variety quality, something beyond what's available in more mainstream establishments. She paused, then added, "They're particularly interested in women with naturally blue eyes. One of my clients has a fascination with them." At the mention of blue eyes, Viper's expression shifted subtly. He glanced down at the tattoo on his arm, then back at Diana. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't recognize the connection between her eyes and those in his tattoo. After a moment of tense silence, Viper nodded slowly. we might be able to accommodate your client's interests. We do offer certain premium services for discerning customers. I'd be very interested in seeing these premium offerings, Diana said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My clients rely on my first-hand assessment. Viper studied her for another long moment before making his decision. Follow me, he said, gesturing toward the staff-only door. I'll show you what we have available. Diana's pulse raced as she followed Viper through the crowd, weaving between tables and patrons. Every step brought her closer to potential danger, but also potentially closer to Emma. She maintained a confident posture, despite the fear churning in her stomach, knowing that any sign of weakness or deception could be fatal. The staff-only door led to a dimly lit hallway, the pounding music from the main room fading to a dull thud as the door closed behind them. Diana noted security cameras mounted at intervals along the ceiling and another bouncer stationed at the far end of the corridor. This area was clearly monitored more carefully than the public spaces. Your timing is good, Viper said as they walked. We have a private showing scheduled for some of our premium offerings. You can observe and decide if they meet your client's standards. Diana nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The clinical way he referred to women as offerings made her skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral, playing the role of a dispassionate business representative. They passed several doors before reaching the end of the hallway, where the bouncer nodded to Viper and stepped aside. Beyond was another door, heavier than the others, which Viper unlocked with a key from his pocket. He held it open for Diana, gesturing for her to enter. The room beyond was larger than Diana had expected, set up like a small theater with several rows of plush chairs facing a raised platform. A handful of men were already seated, drinks in hand, talking quietly among themselves. They looked up as Diana entered, surprise evident on their faces at seeing a woman in this space. Wait here, Viper instructed, directing Diana to a seat in the back row. The presentation will begin shortly. Diana sat down, her eyes scanning the room for exits, while trying not to appear too obvious about it. Besides the door they'd entered through, she spotted another in the corner behind the platform, likely leading to wherever the women were being kept before being presented. Viper disappeared through this second door, leaving Diana alone with the other clients. They regarded her with curiosity, but soon returned to their conversations. From their expensive watches and confident demeanor, Diana guessed they were wealthy men, accustomed to buying whatever or whoever they wanted. After a few minutes, the lights dimmed further, and soft music began playing through hidden speakers. Viper re-emerged and stood at the edge of the platform. "Gentlemen," he announced, nodding to acknowledge Diana. "And lady, thank you for your interest in our exclusive offerings. Tonight we're presenting several of our most exceptional companions available for private engagements at our discreet location." Diana's hands clenched into fists beneath the small table beside her chair as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just a brothel. It was a human trafficking operation where women were being sold to the highest bidder. One by one, young women were brought onto the platform, each introduced by Viper, with a fictional name and a list of qualities that made them desirable. Diana watched in horror as the women stood under the spotlight, their expressions vacant or carefully composed to hide their fear. Some appeared to be under the influence of drugs, their movements slightly uncoordinated. All wore revealing outfits that left little to the imagination. Diana forced herself to remain seated to maintain her facade, even as rage and disgust threatened to overwhelm her. Each woman who wasn't Emma both relieved and disappointed her. Relieved that her daughter wasn't being paraded like merchandise, disappointed that she still hadn't found her. Then Viper announced the next woman with particular pride in his voice. "And now, gentlemen, one of our most requested companions, Crystal." Diana's heart stopped as a young woman with long hair and blue eyes was led onto the platform, despite the makeup and changes to her appearance, despite the 8 years that had passed. There was no mistaking her daughter. Emma, now called Crystal, stood before the audience, her familiar blue eyes downcast, her body language suggesting a practiced submission that broke Diana's heart. Diana had to stifle a gasp, quickly covering the sound by pretending to cough. She shrank back into the shadows where the lighting was dim, averting her eyes as Emma passed by without noticing her. Diana was terrified that if their eyes met, if Emma recognized her mother after all these years, her reaction might give them both away. As Viper continued his grotesque sales pitch, describing Emma's attributes in crude terms, Diana fought to control her breathing to prevent the tears that threatened to fall. She needed to remain calm to find a way to get Emma out of this nightmare without putting either of them in immediate danger. When the presentation concluded and the women were led away, Viper approached Diana, clearly expecting feedback on his merchandise. "I need to use the restroom," Diana said abruptly, her voice strained despite her efforts to sound normal. "Before we discuss business," Viper frowned slightly, but nodded. "Down the hall, third door on the left. Don't wander." He signaled to one of his men to escort her, but at that moment, a commotion erupted at the bar, visible through the now open door to the main club. Viper cursed under his breath and moved toward the disturbance, momentarily forgetting about Diana. Seizing the opportunity, Diana slipped into the hallway and quickly located the restroom. Once inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself a moment to process what she'd seen. Emma was alive. After 8 years of searching, of hoping against hope, Diana had found her daughter. But the circumstances were worse than she could have imagined. Diana pulled out her phone with trembling hands and called Detective Wilson, praying he would answer. When his voice came on the line, she spoke rapidly, keeping her voice low. "I'm at the dollhouse. I've seen Emma. They're calling her Crystal. They're selling women here, Detective. It's a trafficking operation. There was a presentation, and men bidding on women. You need to get here now, Mrs. Matthews." Wilson's voice was sharp with concern. "I told you to stay at your motel. We're working on surveillance, but we don't have enough for a warrant yet." "There's no time," Diana insisted. "I'm in the bathroom, but I don't know how long before they come looking for me." "Emma is here right now. They're going to move her soon. I can feel it." "Stay where you are," Wilson instructed. "I'll gather a team and be there as soon as possible. Don't try to approach your daughter or confront anyone. These people are dangerous." Diana ended the call just as someone knocked on the bathroom door. She quickly splashed water on her face, trying to compose herself before opening it. To her surprise, it wasn't a guard, but Emma, who stood in the hallway, apparently sent a check on the female visitor. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Emma froze, recognition slowly dawning on her face. 8 years had passed, but her daughter doesn't forget her mother's face. Diana approached cautiously, whispering her name, afraid of frightening her or alerting others. "Emma," she breathed, barely audible. "It's me. It's Mom." Emma began to tremble, tears forming in her eyes. For a moment, Diana feared she might scream or run, but instead, Emma glanced nervously down the hallway before stepping into the bathroom and closing the door behind her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice sorrow with emotion. "Is it really you?" Diana nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She wanted nothing more than to pull her daughter into her arms, but Emma's body language warned against sudden movements. Instead, she waited, allowing Emma to process the shock of their reunion. "How did you find me?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible. "I never stopped looking," Diana replied simply. "Not for a single day." Emma's composure began to crumble, tears streaming down her face. In hushed tones, she revealed what had happened 8 years ago, how she had been abducted from the gas station bathroom by traffickers who specifically targeted isolated locations along interstate highways. They had drugged her and transported her across state lines before selling her to the first of several owners. 3 years ago, Viper bought me from another trafficker, Emma explained, her voice shaking. He saw my eyes and said they were special. He had them tattooed on his arm and started calling me Crystal. He tells everyone I'm his girlfriend, but to the other gang members, she couldn't finish the sentence. I'm going to get you out of here, Diana promised, her voice fierce with determination. The police are on their way. Emma's eyes widened with fear. No, you don't understand. They have lookouts everywhere. If they suspect a raid, they'll move us or worse. And there are others like me. Mom. So many others. As they talked, the bathroom door suddenly slammed open with such force that it bounced against the wall. Viper stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from annoyance to rage as he took in the scene before him. Diana and Emma standing close together, tears on Emma's face, the unmistakable intimacy of their posture. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice dangerously low. Emma instinctively stepped back, fear evident in her posture. I was just checking on her like you asked, Viper, she said, her voice trembling. Mom, Emma whispered unconsciously, the word slipping out in her panic. The single word hung in the air between them. Viper's eyes darted between Diana and Emma, recognition dawning as he noticed what should have been obvious from the beginning. They shared the same distinctive blue eyes, the very feature that had drawn him to Emma in the first place. Mom, he repeated, his voice hardening. Well, isn't this interesting? Before either woman could react, Viper lunged forward, grabbing Emma roughly by the arm. Another biker appeared in the doorway, summoned by the commotion. Take this one to my office, Viper ordered, shoving Emma toward his associate, and make sure she doesn't talk to anyone. As Emma was dragged away, her terrified eyes locked with Diana's for a brief moment before she disappeared down the hallway. Viper turned his attention to Diana, his previous businesslike demeanor replaced by cold fury. You're her mother, he stated flatly. You've been looking for her. Diana straightened her spine, refusing to cower, despite the fear coursing through her. Yes, for 8 years. Viper's laugh was without humor. 8 years, that's dedication. And now you've found her. Unfortunately for you, that's a problem for me. He grabbed Diana's arm with bruising force, dragging her from the bathroom and down a different corridor than the one Emma had been taken through. Diana struggled against his grip, but Viper was much stronger, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh as he propelled her forward. They ended up in a small office at the back of the building, a stark space with a metal desk, filing cabinets, and a security monitor showing feeds from cameras throughout the establishment. Emma was already there, held in place by the other biker, her eyes wide with fear. Viper shoved Diana into a chair and stood over her, his imposing figure blocking the door. The only visible exit. You know, he said conversationally, though his eyes remained cold. I knew exactly who your daughter was when I bought her 3 years ago. Diana's blood ran cold at his casual admission. What do you mean? The blue eyes, Viper said, gesturing to Emma. They're rare, especially that particular shade. When I saw her file, I remembered the missing persons reports from years back. Pretty teenager with unusual blue eyes vanished from a gas station. He shrugged. I collect beautiful things, and those eyes were too unique to pass up. You're a monster, Diana whispered, unable to contain her disgust. Viper's expression hardened. I'm a businessman and you're threatening my business. He turned to Emma. Your mother's been busy, Crystal. Or should I call you Emma? She's been talking to the local police about my operation. Emma's gaze shot to Diana, fear and hope wearing in her expression. I've moved my operation multiple times to avoid detection. Viper continued pacing the small office. Always bringing my property with me. He stopped in front of Emma, running a finger down her cheek in a gesture of possession that made Diana's stomach turn. Especially my favorites. Diana leaned forward, desperate to find some way to reason with him. Listen, I have money. I can pay you whatever you want. Just let us go. We won't say anything. The suggestion seemed to amuse Viper, but his amusement quickly transformed into rage. He struck Diana across the face with an open palm, the force of the blow snapping her head to the side and bringing tears to her eyes. Emma cried out, struggling against her captor's grip. Stop. Don't hurt her. Viper ignored her plea, leaning down until his face was inches from Diana's. You think you can buy your daughter back? She's worth more to me than whatever pathetic savings you've scraped together. He straightened up, making a decision. No, I think we need a more permanent solution to this problem. He turned to the biker holding Emma. Get the van ready. We're moving her to the Tucson location tonight. Then looking back at Diana, he added, As for you, people go missing in the desert all the time. No one will think twice about another tragic disappearance. The cold calculation in his voice left no doubt that he was serious. Diana had faced desperate situations during her search for Emma, but never had she been so certain that her life was in immediate danger. As Viper instructed his associate on the preparations needed for transport, Diana caught Emma's eye across the room. Despite the years of captivity and abuse, she could see a spark of the determined girl she'd raised, a spark that hadn't been completely extinguished. The biker holding Emma loosened his grip slightly as he reached for his phone to make the arrangements Viper had ordered. In that moment of distraction, Emma's gaze fell on a heavy glass ashtray sitting on the desk near her. Diana gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding passing between mother and daughter without words. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. Viper's head snapped up at the sound, his expression darkening as he moved toward the security monitor. Cops, he spat. Reaching for a gun holstered at his waist, someone tipped them off. A Viper's attention was diverted. Emma seized her opportunity. She grabbed the heavy ashtray and, with all the strength she could muster, brought it down on the head of the biker holding her. The man staggered momentarily, stunned, his grip on Emma loosening completely. Viper whirled around at the commotion, raising his weapon. Diana launched herself from her chair, tackling him around the waist just as the door burst open and armed officers flooded the room. Detective Wilson at the lead. Police, drop your weapon, Wilson shouted as officers secured Viper and his associate. Diana scrambled away from Viper as he was forced to the ground and handcuffed. Her only thought was for Emma, who stood trembling against the wall, the ashtray still clutched in her hand. Diana rushed to her daughter, wrapping her arms around her for the first time in 8 years, feeling Emma's body shake with sobs against her. I've got you, Diana whispered, stroking Emma's hair. I've got you now. You're safe. As officers led Viper and his associate away, Detective Wilson approached Diana and Emma, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. Are you both all right? He asked, his eyes taking in Diana's reamed cheek where Viper had struck her. Diana nodded, unwilling to release her hold on Emma, even to speak to the detective. We will be. She managed her voice, thick with emotion. Wilson nodded in understanding. We are securing the entire property, both the dollhouse and the compound. There are other women being held here, just as you suspected. He paused, his expression softening. You were right, Mrs. Matthews, about everything. Diana barely heard him, her focus entirely on her daughter, on the miracle of holding Emma in her arms. After 8 long years of searching, they had a long road ahead, recovery, healing, rebuilding their lives. But in this moment, all that mattered was that they had found each other again. Police swarmed the dollhouse, their flashing lights illuminating the desert night in pulses of red and blue. Viper and his associates were led away in handcuffs, their expressions a mixture of rage and disbelief as their operation crumbled around them. Diana sat with Emma in the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her daughter's shoulders, unwilling to let go of her hand, even as paramedics checked them both for injuries. Diana's cheek was beginning to swell where Viper had struck her, but she barely noticed the pain. All she could focus on was Emma alive, found sitting beside her after 8 years of separation. Emma leaned against her mother's shoulder, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. But her eyes remained alert, watching the activity around them, with a weariness that spoke volumes about her experiences. Detective Wilson approached the ambulance, nodding respectfully to both women before speaking. "We've secured the entire property," he informed them. "Found 17 women in total, some at the dollhouse, others at the compound. We're bringing in specialists to help them." The other locations, Emma said, suddenly her voice stronger than it had been in the office. Viper mentioned Tucson, but there are others. Phoenix, Albuquerque, even as far as Denver. They move women between them regularly. Wilson nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "We'll need your help to locate those places, Emma. Your testimony could help us find other victims and shut down their entire network." Emma's grip on Diana's hand tightened, fear flashing across her face at the prospect of revisiting her trauma in such detail. Diana squeezed back reassuringly. "She'll help however she can." Diana said, her protective instincts surging. "But she needs time and medical attention." "Of course," Wilson agreed immediately. "We have a female officer specialized in trafficking cases who can take your statement when you're ready, Emma. For now, we just want to make sure you're both safe and cared for." As Wilson stepped away to coordinate with other officers, Diana turned to Emma, studying her daughter's face in the harsh light of the ambulance. 8 years had transformed the carefree teenager into a young woman whose eyes held shadows Diana couldn't begin to comprehend. The changes went beyond the physical, beyond the thinness of her frame or the premature lines around her eyes. There was a guardedness to Emma now, a careful assessment in her gaze that broke Diana's heart. "I never stopped looking for you," Diana whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "Not for a single day." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I thought about you every day, too, every day. At first, I thought you'd find me right away. Then I hoped you'd at least know I hadn't run away." She swallowed hard. "After a while, I started to hope you'd given up, that you'd found some way to be happy without me. It was easier than thinking of you searching and suffering." Diana shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The idea that Emma had worried about her mother's happiness, even while enduring unimaginable horrors, was almost too much to bear. A female officer approached them, introducing herself as Detective Rivera. "We need to separate you briefly to take your statements," she explained gently. "Emma, would you come with me? We have a quiet place set up in one of the cruises." Panic flashed across Emma's face at the prospect of separation. Diana quickly intervened. "Is that absolutely necessary right now?" she asked. "We've only just found each other." Detective Rivera's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I'm afraid it is. We need to process this scene while evidence is fresh and separate statements are important for building our case." She turned to Emma. "I promise it won't take long, and your mother will be right over there with Detective Wilson the whole time. You'll be able to see each other." Emma took a deep breath and nodded, though her reluctance was evident in every movement as she stood. "It's okay, Mom," she said, summoning a bravery that made Diana's heart ache. "I want to help find the others." Diana watched as Emma walked away with Detective Rivera, their figures illuminated by the flashing police lights. Even from a distance, Diana could see how Emma held herself, shoulders slightly hunched, arms wrapped protectively around her middle, head down, but eyes constantly moving, assessing potential threats. It was the posture of someone who had learned to navigate a dangerous world through hypervigilance and self-assessment. Detective Wilson approached Diana again, offering her a cup of coffee from a thermos. "She's strong," he observed, following Diana's gaze to where Emma sat in the police cruiser, talking to Detective Rivera. Courage. Diana accepted the coffee, warming her hands around the cup. She always was strong, she said softly. Even as a little girl, but no one should have to be this kind of strong. No, Wilson agreed solemnly. They shouldn't. For the next hour, Diana gave her statement, recounting how she'd tracked Emma to the dollhouse and what had transpired inside. She described Viper's admission that he had known Emma's identity when he purchased her and his threats to move her to another location. Throughout her account, Diana's eyes frequently drifted to the police cruiser, where Emma continued to speak with Detective Rivera, as if afraid her daughter might disappear again if she looked away too long. When both statements were complete, Diana and Emma were reunited in Detective Wilson's office at the police station. The small room which had seemed so dismissive of Diana's hopes that morning now represented safety, a quiet space where mother and daughter could begin the first of many difficult conversations about what had happened and what would come next. Emma sat beside Diana on a small couch, a fresh blanket around her shoulders, and a cup of tea in her hands. The adrenaline of the rescue had faded, leaving her pale and exhausted. But there was a determination in her eyes that reminded Diana of the teenager she'd lost 8 years ago. Detective Rivera says they'll need me to testify, Emma said, staring into her tea. About everything, about everyone involved. Diana nodded, careful to keep her expression supportive rather than revealing the rage that burned inside her at what had been done to her daughter. Only if you're ready, and I'll be with you every step of the way. Emma looked up, her blue eyes, so like Diana's own, filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. There are other girls like me, Mom, at the other locations. Some have been there even longer than I was. She set her tea aside, her hands trembling slightly. I need to help find them. I know the system, the places, the people involved. I can identify at least a dozen traffickers who work with the Iron Wolves. Diana's heart swelled with pride, even as it broke for what Emma had endured. Well, she promised, together. But your healing comes first, Emma. You've been through so much. Emma's expression hardened slightly. My healing will come from knowing I helped stop this from happening to anyone else. From knowing that Viper and the others will spend the rest of their lives in prison. Detective Wilson, who had been giving them space while handling paperwork at his desk, looked up at this. With your testimony, Emma, and the evidence we're gathering from the dollhouse and the compound, we have a very strong case. The FBI is already involved, and they're planning raids on the locations you've identified. Emma nodded, a small measure of relief crossing her face. Good. As the night deepened into early morning, arrangements were made for Diana and Emma to stay at a hotel under police protection until more permanent accommodations could be secured. The doctors had examined Emma, and while recommending further medical and psychological evaluation, had cleared her to leave the hospital. Dawn was breaking as Diana and Emma finally left the police station. The first rays of sunlight painting the desert landscape in hues of gold and pink. Diana wrapped her jacket around Emma's shoulders as they walked to the waiting police cruiser that would transport them to the hotel. The simple act of protection, mother sheltering daughter, felt simultaneously ordinary and miraculous after 8 years of separation. They stepped outside into the cool morning air, both women forever changed by their experiences, but finally reunited. Diana helped Emma into the back seat of the cruiser before walking around to the other side and sliding in beside her. As the officer started the engine, Diana glanced at her daughter in the soft morning light, a moment she had imagined countless times during 8 years of searching. Emma's head rested against the window, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but still alert, still watching the world with the careful assessment of someone who had learned the hard way that danger could come from anywhere. But as the car pulled away from the station, Emma's hand found Diana's, their fingers intertwining in a silent affirmation of their connection. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal proceedings, therapy sessions, nightmares, and triggers. There would be moments when the weight of what had happened threatened to overwhelm them both. But as they drove away from the police station toward an uncertain but shared future, Diana felt something she hadn't truly experienced in 8 years. Hope. Not the desperate hope that had sustained her search, but a quieter, more grounded hope that healing, while difficult, was possible.